Moving on from the slides, here we are looking at the operating budget for Caroll Clinic for the year 2020. So the first thing that we look at is the volume. Now the volume is based on two types, fee for service and capitated lives. So the fee for service is 40,000 visits, while the capitated lives is 30,000 members. So the number of member months is 360,000 and the utilization per member month is 0.2 and the number of visits is 72,000 visits. So the total actual visits is a summation of FFS and the number of visits, so that gives us 112,000 visits. Now, all of this information that you're looking at on the operating budget is already given to us, so we are not doing any calculations here. We will do that in the variance analysis in a few minutes. This is also on the slide, so I have just taken it from the slide and put it on the spreadsheet so it looks more organized and more simplified. The second part of the operating budget is revenue, where you have the fee for service, which is $24 per visit, and 40,000 actual visits. You multiply these two to get $960,000 in terms of revenue for the fee for service patients. For the capitated lives, we have a $3 per member per month, and we also have a 360,000 member months. So that gives us a total of 1.08 million in revenue for capitated lives. So the total actual revenue is a summation of 1.8 million and $960,000, which is the revenue coming from fee for service. So the total actual revenues is 2.04 million. The third part of operating budget is cost, which is of two types, variable cost and fixed cost, and that gives us the total actual cost in the fund line at number C. A variable cost is two types. There can be many types in the actual organization, but for the sake of Caroll Clinic, we have divided it into two types. One is labor and the other one is supplies. So the labor is 1.5 million in cost, which is calculated by 60,000 hours, approximately at $26 per hour. And the supplies is 124,800 units at 1.88 per unit, which gives us 234,000 in supplies. So the total variable cost is approximately $1.8 million. For the variable cost per visit, we have $16, and that is given to us by a division of 1.792, which is the total variable cost, divided by 112,000 visits, which is here at line C of the volume, and that gives us a fixed cost, so that gives us a variable cost per visit of $16. Now the fixed cost is another line, which is B, and that's $500,000, which includes the overhead, plant, and equipment, and that so fixed cost will not change by volume. So the total actual cost is a summation of the variable cost and the fixed cost, and that gives us a $2.29 million. So the pro forma profit and loss statement says that the revenues are fee for service, capitated, and total revenues. So the fee for service is $960,000, the capitated is 1.08 million, and that gives us a total of 2.04 million. The fee for service profit and loss is 640,000, capitated is 1.152. So the total is 1.792, which is the same as here, total variable cost. So the contribution margin is when you remove the revenue minus the cost, you get the contribution margin, which is total revenues 2.04 minus the total cost, and that gives a total variable cost right here, gives you the contribution margin, which is 248,000. But you still have to remove the fixed cost. Remember from one of the earlier chapters, you still have to remove the fixed cost from your contribution margin to get the projected profit, which is a negative 252,000 in case of Caroll Clinic. Okay, so now we move on to variance analysis. In variance analysis, we are looking at some types of budgets. So we have already explained that there is a static budget, there is a flexible budget, and there is actual results. And these are the values that are already given to you on the slides. And so I have just put it and organized it in a nice spreadsheet for us to look at easily instead of jumping from slide to slide. So the first thing we calculate is the variable cost per visit, which is total variable cost divided by total visits. I have also written down the formulas for you. Besides that, I have also given you the cell numbers so you don't have to go looking for those. So these cell numbers help you in calculating this actual value, which is total variable cost divided by total visits at $15. Flexible budget amount for total fee for service variable cost is variable cost per visit divided by multiplied by fee for service visits, and that is D20 multiplied by C4, and that is $600,000. Flexible budget amount for total capitated variable cost is variable cost per visit, but now you multiply it with capitated visits instead of fee for service visits like here, and that gives you a 1.08 million when you multiply the values in D20 and C5. Okay, so that's D20 right here and C5 over here, the number of capitated visits. I mean here, 72,000. Okay. The next thing that we actually do in the variance analysis is look at profit variance and components, revenue variance and components, and cost variance and components. So for profit variance and components, there are three components: profit variance, revenue variance, and cost variance. Profit variance is defined by the difference of actual profit and static profit. So you take the actual profit from this column, which is here, and minus the static profit in B18, which is here. So D18 minus B18 gives you a negative $382,000. So that means that the realized profit is less than expected. Okay, we were not expecting that much, that we would have such less profit, but it is less than expected. Revenue variance is actual revenue minus static revenue. So that's D10 minus B10, which you can look here, D10 right here minus B10, and that gives us 60,000. So 60,000, so the revenue is greater than expected, and that's why we are getting a positive 60,000. So the variance is positive, which means that it's greater than expected. The variance is negative, which means that the realized profit is less than expected. And finally, cost variance is static cost minus actual cost, and that's B15 minus D15, and that is a negative $442,000, which means that the realized cost is greater than expected. The major cause of Caroll's poor performance in 2020 was that the costs ran too high. That is the reason you see here. It's a very high number and it is at a negative. So the cost variance is negative, which means that the cost was too high. And that's why the performance was not that great. The profit wasn't the way we expected. The next thing we look at is revenue variance and components, which is comprised of revenue variance, which is the same thing as line here. So it's just a repetition of the same thing. Volume variance is new in revenue variance components, and price variance is also new. So volume variance is a difference of flexible revenue and static revenue, and that we can get from here. So flexible revenue and total revenue and static revenue, so that's the difference, C10 and B10, that gives $100,000. And then finally, price variance in revenue variance components is a difference of actual revenue and flexible revenue. So actual revenue and flexible revenue is, you can obtain it by calculating the difference of D10 and C10. So that's right here, actual revenue and flexible revenue. So that gives us a $40,000 negative. Now what this means? This means that a higher than expected volume should have resulted in revenues being 100,000 greater than expected. But the realized prices, which is the reimbursement rates, were less than expected. So the end result of higher volume at lower prices is realized revenue that was $60,000 higher than forecasted. And finally, cost variance and components. Cost variance is again the same thing as line 27 here. We get the same thing, negative $442,000. Then the volume variance is static cost minus flexible cost, which we get by uh, subtracting B15 and C15. And so we get $330,000 here, negative. So that means that a large portion of 442,000 which we got here, that was a cost run overrun, and that was because the volume forecast was not correct. The volume was not corrected for forecasted correctly. This higher than expected volume is not a financial problem if there were additional fee for service patients, because in fee for service, every single patient that you receive, you get their payment. But if it is a capitated patient, they say that, well, this is all the number of money, this is all the money that we will give. If you add one more patient, then we are not going to give you more money. And that is the problem with having more capitated patients. So there was no matching revenue increase, and that is why we suffered a negative 330,000 in volume variance. The last one is management variance, which is flexible cost minus actual cost. And management variance is basically reflective of management negligence, management actions, and if there is any wrong management decisions. And this is exactly where your role comes in, right? Making informed decisions and properly forecasting. So that is a difference of C15 and D15, and that gives you um, right here. So you get a flexible total total cost for flexible budget minus total static cost, and that gives you the 112,000. I'm sorry, not the static, but the actual cost, and that gives you 112,000. And that's management variance, because any cost variance that is not caused by volume forecast inaccuracies are a result of poor management performance, and that can be influenced by managerial actions regarding labor, wages, supplies. So something was not done properly, the decisions were made poorly, and that led us to have a 112,000 negative in management variance. So all of this explains why the variances occur and how they are calculated for Caroll Clinic.